Up next in the broadcast, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says North Korea has agreed to take another comprehensive look at cases of Japanese citizens abducted by Pyongyang in the 1970s and 1980s. With under a week remaining until the local elections, the last of the opinion polls allowed to be released by law until Election Day show a close race between the ruling and opposition parties for overall seats. Korea's current account surplus logs its 26th straight month in the black, indicating the strength of the nation's export sector. But the numbers are also buoyed by a drop in imports, which may reflect slumping domestic demand. Primetime News begins now.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I am Kang Chae-ri.
And I'm Sean Lim. You're watching Primetime News. We begin with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's big announcement this evening. Japan may lift some sanctions on North Korea and even consider humanitarian aid after the regime agreed to reopen a probe on missing Japanese citizens in Pyongyang.
Prime Minister Abe even called the move a potential breakthrough in strained relations between the two countries. Shin Se-min has our top story.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says that North Korea has agreed to reopen an investigation on the Japanese citizens abducted by the North decades ago, a possible breakthrough in a bitter dispute between the two nations. In a brief statement to reporters Thursday evening, Abe announced that the agreement is just a first step towards resolving the abduction case.
Until the day comes that the families of those abductees can hold their children in their arms, our mission is not over. Since the beginning, we have been determined to pursue this goal and believe that this is a solid first step towards that.
Soon after, North Korea's state news agency, the KCNA, reported the two countries came to terms in lifting some sanctions on Pyongyang once the probe is launched. Japan's chief cabinet secretary separately told reporters that Japan will even consider providing humanitarian aid depending on the progress of the investigation.
We will look into canceling the special sanctions against North Korea and the sanctions against humanitarian vessels from North Korea to enter into Japan.
Pyongyang had promised before to reopen the investigation in 2008, but never did. The North had admitted in 2002 that it kidnapped 13 Japanese nationals in the 1970s and 80s to help train spies, 5 of them who returned to Japan. The country had insisted that the remaining 8 had died. Tokyo, however, claims that at least 17 people were kidnapped and has demanded for those still being held to be released. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The United States is weighing up whether to deploy an advanced missile defense system in South Korea. The Pentagon is making a fresh push to expand a U.S.-led system to its allies in Northeast Asia to counter the North Korean missile threat. But South Korea may not be totally on board. Park Ji-won tells us more.
Quoting a Pentagon official, the Wall Street Journal reports that Washington has conducted a site survey for possible deployment locations in South Korea for its Theater High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD. No final decision has been made yet on the system, which is designed to intercept a diverse range of missiles. South Korean officials have long indicated that Seoul would prefer to develop its own defenses rather than taking part in the U.S.-led system. With that in mind, the report quotes the Pentagon official as saying that the U.S. could deploy the THAAD system to South Korea for a temporary period and then replace it with another system purchased by Seoul. It could also let Seoul buy its own missile defense system. The vice chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, James Winnefeld, meanwhile, is calling for better regional missile defense cooperation between South Korea and Japan. Speaking at a seminar in Washington Wednesday, Winnefeld emphasized the importance of developing a regional missile defense system between its main allies to effectively counter North Korean threats. U.S. Congress also passed a bill last week calling on the Defense Secretary to assess the opportunities to strengthen ballistic missile defense cooperation among Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington. This is raising pressure on South Korea to join the U.S.-led missile defense system. Given Seoul's reluctance to join the U.S.-led system and the development of its own missile defense system, the issue is expected to be one of top agenda items at an upcoming trilateral meeting between the defense chiefs of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. The officials are scheduled to meet this weekend on the sidelines of the Asia Security Summit in Singapore. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Just 6 days remain until Koreans head to the voting booths for the local elections, with early voting beginning tomorrow. That means that Thursday was the last day the media was allowed to release new opinion polls. Our Kwon So-ah has the latest and the last pulse check before the final dash to the ballot box.
The races are tightening up with less than a week to go until the elections. Voters are in the final stages of deciding on which mayor or governor they want to represent them. The latest official poll numbers show the ruling Saenuri Party has the upper hand in 6 regions, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy in 5, and 1 independent candidate leading in the city of Gwangju, while the rest of the 5 regions are neck and neck at this stage. An opinion poll conducted by Research and Research has the incumbent mayor of Seoul, Park Won-soon, still in lead over his conservative rival Chung Mong-jun, but the gap has narrowed compared to 2 weeks ago. In Gyeonggi-do Province, which has the largest number of eligible voters, the ruling Saenuri Party's candidate for governor Nam Kyung-pil has a slight lead over the opposition candidate Kim Jin-pyo. A very tense race is expected in Busan, which is getting a lot of attention this time around, as independent candidate Oh Ga-don is receiving great support. This was one of the last polls used by various media Thursday. The National Election Commission forbids the release of any newly conducted opinion polls 6 days ahead of the elections. For those who won't be able to vote on June 4th, early voting in Korea will open for the first time on Friday for 2 days at some 3,500 polling stations across the country. Anything could happen in the coming days to turn the ratings on their head, as the voter tendency among different age groups and the voter turnout play a big role in the actual results. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
On the current account front, April was another bullish month for Asia's 4th largest economy, but our Hwang Ji-ae says that's not all to the story.
Korea has posted a current account surplus every month for more than 2 years now. The central bank said Thursday that the nation posted a surplus of over $7.1 billion last month. That's a tad less than the $7.3 billion surplus in March, but up by more than $2.5 billion from the same month last year. The Bank of Korea said the current account surplus was helped by strong shipments of automobiles, petroleum, and steel products that led overall exports of products to rise 10% in April from the previous year to more than $56 billion. But imports dropped nearly 1% to $46 billion, raising concerns that the nation's continuous surplus trend is mostly down due to sluggish domestic demand.
Last year, import numbers were very bad, and that means this year's imports would have a very good base effect for a rise. But imports still dropped, indicating sluggish domestic demand.
The strong current account surplus might also burden local exporters in that it will add additional upward pressure to the strengthening Korean won. The Bank of Korea has forecast the surplus for the year to reach $68 billion. This target looks attainable considering the accumulated surplus in the January to April period already stands at over $22 billion. And the central bank expects the current account surplus to extend to a 27th straight month in May on strong exports. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Now, let's spend some time to get an in-depth analysis on the April numbers as well as other elements that are weighing on Korea's economic growth this year. Dr. Yang Junsuk is joining us. Thank you very much for your time today. So Korea's been logging a surplus for more than 2 years now, thanks to firm export figures. But this surplus may not be welcomed anymore. Many are concerned with the strength of the Korean won and the pace of that gain. And data points like this could fan that trend even more. What do you think?
Okay, well, the nice thing about this current numbers is that our exports have grown even more than we expected. Now, it's a bit early to it's a bit too early to actually feel a lot from Korea won appreciation, but even with the appreciation, the fact that our exports grew quite a bit is actually a bit comforting. Now, the flip side of that, the imports, it has grown, but it hasn't been growing as much as we thought it would. But it does indicate that the Korean recovery is not as strong as we expected it to be.
So in this report this time around, was there anything that caught your attention or stood out to you as an indicator of a trend that the Korean economy is in?
Okay, well, two things really caught my attention. One is that the automobile exports to the United States went up. So that is a very good indication that not only is United States economy recovering, but our cars are still maintaining their competitiveness. The second thing that really hit me was that in the capital count, the portfolio capital count, we've shown a surplus, which basically means that there's a lot of foreign investment, short-term investment that's coming into Korea.
We've been talking a lot about the April ferry disaster hurting domestic consumption. How long do you think there will be an effect on the country's economy?
Okay, well, looking at Korea in the past as well as other countries, these type of effects usually lasted for a few weeks to a few months. So our second quarter consumption has been hit quite strongly, I understand. And maybe our third quarter consumption will be hit as well.
Well, Professor, you alluded to a stronger U.S. economy from the increased car exports, but the concern seems to be that U.S. and European markets will still be a challenge for Korea's exports. What's your forecast, and do you think Korea can reach its growth target this year?
Okay, well, I think if the recovery continues, then our exports to the United States will, I think, be fairly good. I think the products that we are exporting now, especially things like smartphones, are less affected by exchange rates than it used to be. So I think exports to the United States will do fine. Exports to the EU, on the other hand, well, the EU recovery, it does seem to be in a recovery, but I think a lot of people are commenting that perhaps it's not as strong as the American recovery and more fragile.
Now, policymakers here have been saying there's no problem in terms of inflation in Korea. Then maybe there is an option. There is some room for a rate cut by the Bank of Korea to perk up demand and put the Korean won's rise in check, no?
Well, it's a possibility. I think it's a possibility that we should keep open in the future. But until about March, the Korean recovery has been on a steady recovery path. So there was no particular need for a cut in interest rates, and also our base money supply rate of increase, the rate of increase in our base money supply has been higher than the increase in the larger money supply, the M2 and the LF. That means that there's a potential for a very high and very quick inflation if recovery takes place too quickly.
All right, Professor Yang, thank you as always for your insight and comments tonight.
Thank you.
Moodys says Korea will join the ranks of advanced economies by 2018. Thomas Byrne, the senior vice president for the credit rating agency, was speaking to reporters in Seoul this Thursday, where he said Korea will catch up to countries like France in terms of GDP per person in just 3 to 4 years' time. He chalked up the development to Korea's government policies as well as competitiveness, adding that Korea has maintained more rapid growth compared to other G20 countries. Byrne said he expects the country's GDP to grow 3.8% this year. That is slightly higher than recent predictions by local private as well as state-run think tanks. Achieving peace and prosperity anywhere in the world is a tall task, and Asia is no exception. Historical as well as territorial disputes between neighboring countries have inflamed tensions in recent months. And to talk over ways to cool them, world leaders and experts have gathered on Korea's southern island of Jeju for a 3-day global forum. Connie Kim files this report.
Under this year's theme of Designing New Asia, the 9th Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity kicked off Thursday. At the opening ceremony, former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard and former Chinese Foreign Minister Li Jiaoxing called for rising conflicts in the region to be resolved peacefully, including the North Korea issue.
The new leader, Kim Jong-un, comes across as both dangerous and erratic. It is important that China and others in the region explain to their neighbours the pace and scope of their military modernisation to build confidence and trust.
China's rise in power and its territorial disputes in the East and South China Seas were the focus during a discussion that followed the opening ceremony.
The rise of powerful nations in the West came at the expense of other countries. As a peace-loving nation, China has never sought to invade other countries. The progress and development realized by China came peacefully.
Regarding its territorial disputes, the former foreign minister said China had sovereignty over the areas.
There is free navigation in the South China Sea, so we always welcome this. However, interfering in the territory is unfair behavior. We need to resolve this through diplomacy.
For peace to be realized in Asia, the speakers agreed that regional economic partnerships and free trade pacts were positive ways to enhance cooperation and diffuse tensions. Amid a number of territorial and historical conflicts in the region, world leaders and experts have gathered to discuss ways to resolve the differences for the sake of peace and prosperity. Connie Kim, Arirang News, Jeju.
All the best that Korea has to offer in the form of defense technology will be on display for the next few days at an exhibition just outside of Seoul. Among the visitors on the very first day was Korean President Park Geun-hye, who talked about opening up a new era in defense. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
President Park Geun-hye at the opening ceremony of the Korea Defense Technology Exhibition in Kintex, northwest of Seoul, on Thursday, emphasized the importance of civilian and military technology cooperation.
국방 분야의 우수한 기술이 민간에 적용되면 지금까지 없었던 새로운 가치가 창출될 수 있습니다. 그동안 우리나라는 꾸준히 선진 국방 기술을 축적해 왔고 수준 높은 민간 과학기술 역량을 보유하고 있기 때문에 민군 기술 협력의 시너지는 매우 크다고 할 수 있습니다.
The technical cooperation began in 1970 and has created over $1 billion in added value.
Over the past 40 years, we have invested $1.5 billion and in return made $18 billion, a 16-fold increase in economic effect.
The defense industry also created tens of thousands of jobs, boosting Korea's economy. Just last year alone, Korea's defense industry's total value was worth over $34 billion. Jointly hosted by the Science and Defense Ministries, the exhibition displays thousands of military gadgetry, with some aimed to significantly enhance military performance in the near future.
I'm wearing state-of-the-art bulletproof equipment called a super soldier. With this strapped on, a soldier is not only better protected, but they can march much further and carry much heavier weight.
The exhibition gives the public a small glimpse at the Korean military's capabilities in defense technology and will be open to the public for 4 days through June 1st. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News, Paju.
A multinational crew of astronauts has safely arrived at the International Space Station amid worsening ties between Russia and the United States.
With more on that, we turn to Paul Yi at the News Center. Paul, despite increasing tensions back here on Earth, it appears that this space program remains a symbol of cooperation for all countries. What's the atmosphere like up there?
Well, the commander of the ISS, Oleg Kotov, gave a warm welcome to his new crewmates as they began their 6-month mission. NASA officials and their Russian counterparts said there was no room for politics in space. The new team includes veteran Russian cosmonaut Maxim Sarayev, U.S. Navy pilot Reed Wiseman, and German geophysicist Alexander Gerst. The team made the 6-hour journey to the $100 billion station after blasting off from Kazakhstan on Wednesday. Meanwhile, many are casting doubts on the future of the space station, with relations between Moscow and Washington hitting their lowest point since the end of the Cold War. Earlier this month, Russian officials said they would not support a U.S.-led proposal to operate the station beyond 2020. The U.S. has been largely dependent on Russia for rocket launches after NASA was forced to scrap its shuttle program. And leaders of the Eurosceptic parties are meeting in Brussels in a bid to form an alliance in the future European Parliament, following Sunday's elections that saw a strong swing towards extreme nationalist parties from across the political spectrum. Despite the shift in voter sentiment, overall control remains in the hands of traditional centrist parties that still want a more united Europe. French, Italian, Dutch, Belgium, and Austrian party leaders are trying to capitalize on their recent momentum and create a political grouping. In order to do that, they'll need 25 members of parliament from 7 states to jump on board. Meanwhile, leaders of the 28-nation bloc are also wrapping up a summit in Brussels, with many calling on the European Council to address this growing demand for reforms. British Prime Minister David Cameron said the EU had gotten too big, too bossy, and too interfering. The former military chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has won a sweeping victory in Egypt's presidential election after 3 days of voting. According to provisional results, Sisi captured over 94% of the votes cast in most polling stations across the country. His only rival, leftist candidate Hamid Sabahi, had gained only about 4%. The general who toppled Egypt's first freely elected leader, Mohamed Morsi, has now joined a long line of leaders drawn from the military. Meanwhile, voter turnout was lower than expected at 44%. That's less than the 40 million votes, or 80% of the electorate, that Sisi had called for last week. That wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. Starting with World Cup football, injuries are forcing South Korea manager Hong Myung-bo to make a switch at the left back position, and it's going to be a gamble. He's trading out Kim Jin-soo for Park Ju-ho, but the thing is, they're both injured. Kim and Park's injuries came before the 23-man roster announcement, but Kim's ankle isn't recovering fast enough, according to the team physician. On the other hand, Park's foot inflammation has come under control, making him the better bet to be ready on time. And with central defender Hong Jung-ho picking up a non-serious ankle injury in South Korea's 1-0 loss to Tunisia on Wednesday, the national team will need this gamble to pay off. Now for golf, Tiger Woods has announced that he's not playing in the U.S. Open next month as he recovers from back surgery. He was cleared to lightly chip and putt over a week ago, but announced on his website that he would forego playing in competition to continue his rehab. It's the third time he's missed 2 majors in a row in a single year, and the second time missing out on the U.S. Open in his entire career. The U.S. Open, meanwhile, begins on June 12th. And now we come back home to get to Thursday's top KBO matchup between the NC Dinos and the Hanwha Eagles. Now we fly to the first inning. It's NC's Eric Thames and Mo Chang-min. They bring in 2 runs to start the game. But we go to Hanwha, and they go up 3 runs in the second inning, and that's the last lead they hold. In the third, NC's Thames and Mo connect for 2 more before the team explodes in the fourth for a 9-run inning, including Thames's grand slam to center field. And Hanwha adds 4 in the bottom of the 8th, but it's NC that wins this one, 15-7. And looking at the other games, Tucson wins over Kia 15-10. Meanwhile, Samsung beats LG 4-2, and SK leads Nexen 5-3 in the top of the 9th inning. Well, that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
Recent sweltering conditions have made it clear that summer is here in Korea.
Yes, it is here. And for more, we connect to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, fill us in.
Well, guys, tomorrow is going to be another hot day here in Korea. Earlier today, daytime highs in Seoul peaked at 30.9 degrees and 35.6 degrees over in Daegu. But if you thought today was hot, brace yourselves for even hotter conditions tomorrow. Seoul's daytime high should jump to 32 degrees and 35 to Daegu. Along with the above seasonal average temperatures will come high UV levels in most parts of the country, so make sure to apply sunscreen when staying in the sun for longer than 30 minutes. At the moment, the nation is under the influence of a high-pressure system from water south of Jeju, which is leading to partly cloudy skies across the map. Fine dust levels are back to normal in most parts of the central regions. However, levels are forecast to remain high in the southern regions through tomorrow morning. On to Friday's readings. Seoul tops out at 32 degrees, while Daegu and Gwangju soar to the mid-30s. Taking a look at other places, Jeju starts off the day at 18 degrees before reaching 28 in the afternoon. Dokdo and Mount Kumgang hit 21 and 30 degrees respectively. That's all for now, and back to you guys.
Thank you very much for that, Pyongyang. And that will do it for this edition of Primetime News. Thanks for being with us tonight.
And Arirang News will be back with Late Night Edition. See you then.